Thousands of people go missing every year across the world, although most are usually found unharmed. There are those who are never seen again, and the circumstances surrounding their disappearance leaves people with more questions than answers. Here we explore the cases of 8 people whose vanishing or death have a supernatural or similar feel to it. Number 1. Granger Taylor. Born in Vancouver Island, British Columbia in October of 1948, Granger Taylor lived with his mom, stepfather, and siblings on a farm in a logging and fishing town. His father had drowned when he was young. Granger Taylor was extremely good with machinery, spending his days fixing and repairing any kind of machine after he dropped out of school in the 8th grade. He was able to build a full car at the age of 14 after he had found a car frame outside, and by the age of 21, he was able to restore a 1910 locomotive which he found in 1969. The abandoned locomotive had been left there decades beforehand and was covered in moss, and the engine had been blown up and undercarriage removed in World War II. But after finding it, he managed to fully restore it and went on to build a 100-yard railroad in his parents' garden to ride it on. He later bought a fuselage and landing gear which had been part of a fighter plane and managed to fully rebuild it back to a working fighter plane, which he later sold for $20,000. By the late 1970s, he got into aliens and space, which made him build what he referred to as a spaceship in his parents' garden. He used this to mainly hang out with his friends, and in the spaceship he had a stove, sofa, and a TV, and he would sometimes sleep there too. After building his spaceship, he began telling his friends and family he was now in contact with aliens using a radio he had built himself, and that these aliens were willing to teach him different things, and these aliens planned to meet him. He explained to everyone that the aliens told him they would collect him on a night when it would be raining, because then the rain would hide their UFO. He then wrote out a will in June 1980, and then on the 29th of November 1980, during a thunderstorm, he began writing a note out to his parents which read, "Dear Mother and Father, I have gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship, as recurring dreams assured a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe, then return. I am leaving behind all my possessions to you, as I will no longer require the use of any. Please use the instructions in my will as a guide to help. Love, Granger." After sticking the note to his parents' bedroom door, he drove to his usual restaurant where he found his friends and told them that he was now going to go into space, and said goodbye to everyone. He left and made one final stop to his best friend, Robert Keller. He told Robert he was going to space, and Robert asked if he could go with him. But Granger said, "No, you have more things left to do here on Earth." He said his last goodbye and drove away. His parents called police a few days later to report him as missing, and searches began, but they found nothing. So his mom kept her back door unlocked in case he ever returned home. It wasn't until March of 1986 that an explosion site was found near his home. It was clear a massive blast had gone off there, and there was pieces of debris of a truck and 2 human bones. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police said the truck debris was Granger's truck, and a pathologist looked at the 2 bones and determined they were Granger's, although no DNA tests were ever done. Although some of his friends don't believe it was his truck that belonged to the pieces of debris, as he told a few people he would need to dispose of the truck. But some did conclude he had used explosives to end his own life at the blast site found in 1986. Or maybe it wasn't his truck, and maybe his truck was the one found abandoned in the woods in 2018. We will never know. Number 2. Frederick Valentik. 20-year-old instructor pilot Frederick Valentik started his 1-hour flight from Moorabbin Airport in Victoria, Australia to King Island, Tasmania at 6:19 p.m. on the 21st of October 1978. He was flying in a Cessna 182L, and the weather was clear and light winds, and at 7:06 p.m., he contacted Air Traffic Control Steve Roby back in Melbourne to ask if there were any aircrafts flying in the area. Air Traffic Control replied no, so Frederick said that there was a huge aircraft with 4 bright lights flying 1,000 feet above him and going fast. Frederick continued telling the air traffic controller, "It seems to be playing some sort of game. He's flying over me. It's not an aircraft. It seems like it's stationary. What I'm doing right now is orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me. Also, it's got a green light and sort of metallic. It's shiny on the outside. Oh, it's just vanished." He sent out his last transmission at 7:12 p.m., saying, Melbourne, that strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again, and it's not an aircraft. After this, 17 seconds of silence followed, then the loud sound of scraping metal. A 4-day search took place, but nothing of Frederick or his plane were ever found, and he has never been seen again. Not on our planet anyway. Number 3. Captain William Schaffner. 28-year-old William Schaffner was an American pilot originally from Ohio and had served with the U.S. Air Force during the Vietnam War, before he was part of an exchange with RAF Binbrook in Lincolnshire, where he was now a number 5 squadron member. He was now a pilot for the high-speed BC Lightning interceptor aircraft, which was used to intercept anything sent by the Soviet Union. Part of this was always being on constant standby, ready to intercept anything. On the stormy night of the 8th of September 1970, William Schaffner was dispatched in his BC Lightning interceptor aircraft when British and American radio stations started monitoring a UFO which was flying erratically and fluctuating in altitude by the British shoreline before it was hovering by Denmark. The whole flight of this erratic UFO was being monitored by both the British and the American radio stations as William Schaffner tried to intercept it. He then vanished after communicating his coordinates back to the Air Force. It wasn't until the 7th of October that the HMS Kettleston managed to locate William's aircraft, laying on the seabed by the Yorkshire coastline. His aircraft was intact and had no damage to it, and its canopy was closed. William was never found. Number 4. Marco Aurelio Simon. Marco Aurelio Simon was a 15-year-old boy from São Paulo in Brazil who lived with his twin brother and both of his parents. Marco Aurelio was known as a shy but really happy boy who easily made friends. He had just become a senior scout leader and was preparing to go camping and hiking with his scout group, where they were going to climb a 2,420-meter high mountain. On the 7th of June 1985, he was dropped off to the train station by his dad, where he met up with his scout group friends before saying bye to his dad and leaving. When he and his friends made it to their camp near Pico dos Marins, they were greeted by the scout guide and leader, then went to set up their tent. At 2 p.m. they went for a swim in the nearby river, but when they returned to their tent, found all of their belongings had been messed up, so asked the scout guide if he had seen what happened, but he didn't see anything. Later, the whole scout group came together and started a bonfire where everyone spoke about the hike and climb they would do the next day, but one of the boys, called Osvaldo, felt like they were being watched the entire time. Then after everyone got back to their tents ready to sleep, Osvaldo saw someone or something walk slowly across his tent, which made him scared. The scout leader, called Juan, heard someone smack his tent, so he went out to see who it was but didn't see anyone. By the morning, everyone got up, ate breakfast, then began their hike to the Pico dos Marins area, known for steep climbing, which was around a 4 to 6 hour walk away. They arrived, then began their climbing, but after reaching 1,200 meters, one of the boys, Osvaldo, injured his knee so badly that he couldn't walk anymore. So the leader, Juan, and the rest of the boys made a stretcher to carry Osvaldo on so they could carry him back to camp. Marco Aurelio offered to walk ahead of them to get to camp quicker to get help for Osvaldo, but Osvaldo and the rest of the boys said no, as they should all stick together. But scout leader Juan told Marco Aurelio to go ahead and just mark the number 240 on rocks along his way. Juan and the boys started following Marco's stone markings. They walked past 3 stone markings before getting to a fork in the road where Marco Aurelio had taken the left side trail. The scout boys begged the leader to let them take the path Marco had gone down, but leader Juan refused and made everyone go down the right-sided path instead. Juan then lied and told everyone that the 2 paths meet up at the end of the trail so they would soon see Marco, which was a lie. Because of Juan forcing the group to go on the right trail, this was a longer route. They originally began walking back at 2 p.m. that day and got back to their camp at 5 a.m. the next day because of Juan. When they got to camp, Marco Aurelio wasn't there, so Juan decided to spend 5 hours searching the trails for him, but found nothing, so reported Marco Aurelio missing. 300 people, including military officers, soldiers, Army Infantry Battalion, firefighters, climbers, bushmen, rescue specialists, volunteers, dogs, helicopters, and an Air Force plane, spent the next 28 days searching for him, but nothing of him was ever found. And on the second night of him being missing, the scout group boys were in their tent when they heard loud whistling coming from the forest, and they knew Marco Aurelio had a whistle as he was a scout. So the boys ran to where the whistling was coming from, when all of a sudden, 3 overpowering blue flashes appeared. And the next day, on the 3rd night, a large fire started, but it wasn't possible to determine its cause. It's also come out that it's not really possible to get lost on those trails, as you can clearly see the local city from there and walk in the city's direction. The leader, Juan, was fired from other scout groups for misconduct and was known to deliberately make mistakes and cause problems. Marco Aurelio has never been found. Number 5. The Kinross Incident. On the 23rd of November 1953, an unidentified object appeared the ground intercept radars of the United States Air Defense Command in Michigan. The aircraft was speeding across the sky at 500 miles per hour between Lake Huron and Lake Superior and was going towards Sioux Lock, which was under high control of the Army Corps of Engineers and is now used today to look through traffic between the lower Great Lakes and Lake Superior. After seeing the unidentified object speeding across on their radars, they immediately contacted Kinross Air Force Base, who then sent an F-89C Scorpion jet to intercept the UFO. Inside the Scorpion jet were First Lieutenant Felix Moncla and Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson, and as they were out to intercept it, Robert reported that he couldn't find the aircraft, so ground control sent him directions, and after locating the aircraft, the Scorpion jet matched its speed of 500 miles per hour and matched its altitude of 7,000 feet. Ground control watched their radar as the Scorpion began heading straight toward the UFO, then saw as both aircrafts merged together. That's when the Scorpion jet completely vanished from the radar, and now only the UFO could be seen as it began going upwards extremely fast before disappearing. A search was done by the Coast Guard and the U.S. Air Force, but they were not able to find any wreckage or clues as to what happened to the two pilots and the jet. Soon after, the U.S. Air Force made claims that it wasn't a UFO that was on their radar that day. It was a Canadian C-47 plane that flew there by accident, and that Felix Moncla also had vertigo, so probably crashed into a lake. But seeing this, the Canadian Air Force wrote an official statement saying that this was not true. None of their planes had been involved in any incident there, and there were no registered flights in those areas from any Canadian planes that night. Whatever happened to the plane and the two pilots is still unknown to this day. Number 6. Christopher Case. Christopher Case was a 35-year-old man who grew up in Richmond, Virginia, but had moved to Seattle in Washington when he was in his 30s. He worked as a music executive. His job involved producing sounds for places like elevators and waiting rooms. He was extremely smart, friendly, and was always exercising, known for his interest in fitness. On the 11th of April, Christopher went to San Francisco for a business trip where he met other music executives, and he was introduced to a woman who shared similar interests as him. After spending some time together at the business meeting, she told Christopher she wanted a relationship with him and started asking him to take her to his house. He politely declined her offer due to her being 20 years older than him, and he found her intense. Because he had rejected her, she got angry and told him that she is a witch who was now going to put a curse on him and he would be dead within a week. He didn't believe in magic, so he just shrugged off what she said, and he soon traveled back to his apartment in Seattle. He contacted his friend, Sammy, and told her what had happened, but they both just dismissed what happened. On the morning of the 14th of April, he called his friend Sammy, sounding distressed, saying he was awake all night after hearing whispering in his home, had been seeing shadows and felt like he was being watched all night. On the 16th, he told Sammy he had been paralyzed as he was lifted off of his bed the night before, as he was strangled then viciously thrown back down onto his bed. He now had cut across the ends of his fingers and his bedsheets had his blood on them. He also told his other friends what had happened, and he went to a religious bookstore owned by Rodney Higuchi. When police later spoke to Rodney, he told them how Christopher had walked in, picked up some crucifixes, so he asked what he was using them for, and Christopher told him he needed them to defend himself as he thinks there were paranormal entities after him. After this, he was kept awake all night and didn't go to work for the next 2 days. The night of the 16th, something scared him so badly that he abruptly left his apartment in the early hours and rushed to a hotel to stay there for the night. The next day, Sammy tried to get in contact with him, but she couldn't, so she called the police to do a welfare check on him. When they arrived at his apartment, the doors were locked, so they left and told Sammy they couldn't gain entry. Later that same evening, Christopher left a voicemail on Sammy's answering machine saying they had almost got him the last night and said he thinks by tomorrow he will be dead. After leaving this voicemail, he visited a Catholic priest and returned to the bookstore to ask Rodney for more help. That night, the 17th of April, he returned home. On the 18th of April 1991, Police found Christopher dead in his bathtub. He was found fully clothed, sitting in his bath in a kneeling position with his head against the wall. His house was filled with crucifixes, books about the occult, and he had put salt around the entrances, and police could hear faint religious music playing from some of his rooms. There were no signs of any struggle, and the coroner confirmed he had died from heart failure. Number 7. Christopher Tompkins. Christopher Tompkins was a 20-year-old man who lived with his mother and worked for a nearby surveying company. Chris's mom usually would babysit for the owner of the company. On the 25th of January 2002, Chris drove his car to the office at 8 a.m. and then rode with his coworker to the job site in Ellerslie, Georgia. Working at the job site that day was Chris and 3 coworkers. All 4 men were walking in a line, 50 feet apart from each other, and Chris was at the end of the line. The man next to Chris in the line had been having a conversation with him. Then he looked away for 1 minute to finish his task. Then he said something to Chris but got no response, so turned back around to look at him but realized Chris was no longer there. He began calling out Chris's name but still no response, so he told the other guys working there, so they start looking around but Chris wasn't there. So they eventually called his family, who then drove down and started looking around, and they soon found one of Chris's work boot just sitting on the top of a barbed wired fence. The other boot was found 5 months later by a farmer several miles away. There were no signs of any struggle and no signs of what happened to Chris. Also, he never went back for his car left at the office, and his car keys were never found. Number 8. Kenji Iwamura, Mount Asahadake. 2 men were reported missing from Dazetsuin National Park in Japan, so a search was done on the 24th of July 1989 with helicopters flying over the area. Towards the end of that day, the helicopter crew saw a large SOS sign that was 18 meters long and 5 meters tall. For miles away from the summit of Mount Asahadake, an isolated area that had no trail to it. The search crew landed at the SOS sign and began a search when the 2 missing men walked out of the woods, relieved to be rescued. Police talked to the 2 men and said it was only because of the SOS sign they had made that they were able to find them. The 2 men were confused and said, "What SOS sign?" They explained to police they had never made an SOS sign and had never even seen the sign there. The next day, police traveled back to the area to look around and see if they could find out who made the SOS sign. As they looked around, they found a set of human bones sat in a pile 10 to 30 meters away from the SOS signal, and 165 meters north of the sign was a backpack buried under a tree. Police opened the backpack and found 3 cassette tapes, a Sony tape recorder, and an ID card inside. The pile of human bones were sent to the Asahikawa Medical University, and they said some bones were broken and some had gnaw marks on them, and the medical examiner said the bones were those of a woman with an O blood type. Getting this information back confused detectives because the backpack didn't seem to belong to a woman. They played one of the tapes found in the backpack. This is what they heard.
死者の声から8年、最終鑑定の結果、白骨遺体は男性で SOS の声と同一人物であることが分かった。
The rough translation for the audio says, "Help me, I can't move on the cliff. Lift me from here, I can't go up deeply." Nothing was making sense, such as how this person had managed to cut down 19 birch trees and move them 100 meters to make the SOS sign without an axe or any knife. Also, how was he stuck up there when there was a path leading straight down to civilization? The police went back to the medical examiner and said the bones can't belong to a woman because the ID we found in the backpack belongs to a man who went missing 5 years before, a man called Kenji Iwamura. Kenji had been an office worker who was staying at a hostel when he went missing 5 years before. So, hearing this information, the medical examiner changed his original statement and said the bones belonged to a male with an A blood type. Police were grateful and closed the case, although many are left with loads of answers. When police contacted Kenji's family, they said that was his backpack, but the voice on the tape recording wasn't their son's voice.